guys, Bloch here from Thunderbird Aviation, and this week we're going to be talking. We're actually going to do a tire change on an airplane here, and then also we're going to talk about aging aircraft, trying to find parts, maintaining that, and then we're going to talk a little bit about owner-produced parts. And so I think the first thing I'd like to do is give me the stick here. This is my son Pete. He's going to be doing the videoing for us. He's a apprentice mechanic at Thunderbird Aviation, and he's also working on his career in he wants to be an airline pilot. So he's been working with me all his life, maintaining airplanes. He's going to be getting his A&P, but he also wants to get his ATP and fly jets. So he's now just working on his instruments, and then moving on to his commercial and multi and CFI and stuff like that. So he's our videographer today, and I thank him for doing that. So the first thing we're going to do is that's just the overview about what we're going to talk about. Let's just go in and start kind of on just doing the tire change and what we're kind of be looking for, the tools and different things that we're going to do. So let's do that, and then we'll get into how do we keep our airplanes, how do we keep on getting parts for them, and or manufactured parts and different things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull this tire on this airplane. I don't need to change this one out, so I'm going to use that one to go on and off the axle, and then I have we'll set up and do an actually tire change over there on one that I need to build up. So Pete, do we need any more light, or do you think we're good here?
I can grab it.
There you go. How's that? All right. Hopefully that gives a little bit of light here. I'm going to put some of our tools that we have there. There's going to be the cotter pin that we're going to use to put the tire back on again. You can use a cotter pin extractor. Here's a cutter. A lot of times those work good for cutting the excess tails off the length on the cotter pin, and they help also pulling the cotter pin out along with the cotter pin extractor. And so as you see, the first thing we got to do is we're taking a look at this tire. This tire is in good shape. It doesn't need to be replaced, but I'm just going to use that as far as coming off the axle. And that is, we're going to go over to the brakes and the brake disc, and we're going to need to pull those off. So generally, most small aviation brake calipers are in a take a 7/16 socket. And we're just going to pull the caliper. Sometimes they're safety wired, depending on if there's holes drilled in it. And if you have to do that, just cut the safety wire off. Do it the same way as they were installed. And so we're just going to pull the bolts there. That will take the backing plate off. And this is a good time when you're inspecting it just to see how the brakes were wearing on the brake discs, brake linings were. So do that, and you see now the backing plate comes off, and you can see there's been maybe a little bit of hydraulic fluid, so maybe that puck is leaking a little bit. But you look at the brake linings; these look really good. There's plenty of wear. These are the rivets in there, so they seem to be pretty even. Everything looks great on these. This is your component right here, the actual hydraulic portion of your caliper, and you can see here's the brake lining on the other side there, and that's really good. I do notice a little bit of hydraulic fluid coming off of here, and that would require we pop this off and do an O-ring change in there. We have time today. I could show you that, but for right now, I mean, it's weeping a little bit. It's just an 1/8 inch O-ring that goes in there, so and dirt and debris kind of gets in there along with brake dust. So they're not, it's not a really super duper seal. I mean, they work fine on how they do, but they weep sometimes a little bit. Doesn't mean you're going to have a big puddle there, but just the nature of the brake moving in and out, sometimes there is a little bit, but it's a cheap fix by putting a new O-ring in and cleaning up that, the puck on there. Not a big deal. I mean, it's not like, going down the auto parts store where you have to have them overhauled. These, it's just a simple O-ring that we replace on it. But right now, I'm just going to leave that so it's not dangling on there. And we're going to go, since we got that off on that side, we're going to go to this side. And now you see in this case, the cotter pin, you can pick it off there. It's just bent up and over the axle nut. So I'm just going to take that, take my end off of here, and hang on to my FOD pieces. Always try to do that so you don't get them in your tire later. So now you can grab your cotter pin extractor and kind of start working up on that. You do that, then pull that out like that. Another way of doing it is, if you don't have that, just grab on with your cutter. Use that as a pry bar and a lever. There, we got that off. Always keep don't leave stuff around it so you're going to have FOD for your tires and different things like that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to just grab a channel locks. Sometimes you'll have an axle nut. Channel locks is pretty much your favorite tool for tires for most airplanes. The Cessna might have flats on it. This one is just a steel ring with a hole in it, or a couple holes in there for lining up the cotter pin. And all we're going to do is just back off that nut a little bit more here. You can see threaded on the inside there. It's got the holes along there for different lineup spots for going through the holes in the axle. All right, so set that back there. Now this is something that a lot of people forget about. You're pulling this wheel off. A lot of times in aviation, there's little spacers here and there for adjusting your bear, how tight you're tightened down in your bearings and lining up the holes. So always, whenever you do that, check both sides and make sure there's no spacer that fell off. This axle doesn't have a spacer on it, but if it came off with it, you might lose it when you bring it over to the bench. So there's no spacer there, no spacer there. Always kind of take a look at that, and if it was working fine, it didn't require. They're kind of as required in aviation, so you don't know. Depending on when some of the stub axles were manufactured, some of them are longer, some of them are shorter, and you just don't know. And I've even had it where an axle's been, or a landing gear has been replaced on one side with a newer model, so it didn't get any spacers, or vice versa, and the other side had a spacer. And just remember, it's not, depending on when and some of these parts on there, and depending when they're manufactured and if they've ever been replaced, some might require it to line up properly and some might not. So if it's not even side to side, it could be the proper way of doing it. It's also could be that someone lost a spacer and they're just kind of cranking that nut on there a lot further than they need to, and the holes never lined up, and it's hard putting a cotter pin in. Maybe it does. So you have to kind of take a look at how it was set up, and if there was that, put it back on there, and if there wasn't, you can question it, but just see if everything goes back together properly without the spacers, then there wasn't one required. So from right there, we're just going to leave this tire here because I'm not going to replace that one. We're going to go over to the bench, and we're going to go take a look at doing the tire change, tube change. One thing I wanted to talk about, as far as that's going to kind of tie in with keeping aging aircraft and just the availability of parts. it's been very difficult to even get like brake discs and things for GA airplanes. The manufacturers have been really having trouble keeping up with everything. Here's a brand new one by APS. I really like the APS products. This is called their black steel. This does seem to wear really well along with their brake linings. But I've been having trouble, and think about a flight school. These wear out. There's a dimension on them, okay? Dimension of thickness, and you go to, and you can see online, they'll have a awareness chart. You can even order one of these up if you want to have them in your hangar. Here's like one of those brake identifications charts. It's kind of nice having around. This shows you all the brake linings, the different varieties of them, and then it talks about the brake disc. So in this case, this is a 0-2000. Okay, so here's a 0-2000, and it gives you the minimum wear dimensions right there. And I go down here, so that's the thickness of the actual disc. So when these get down to 0.205, they're beyond limits. And the other thing you have to take a look at, there's also, if for some reason they had worn unevenly and they're really grooved, that also is going to reject it. You don't want to have a bunch of grooving and unevenness, because as your brake linings will finally wear into it, but you won't have good braking. And the thing is, you want to be able, when you need the brakes, you want to have them. So those are the main things. But dimensionally, there's always going to be a wear limitation. And this is nice because it's a chart I can just go to and take a look. So that's something to think about. But since these are hard to get a hold of at times, but you can get the brake linings, that's a good reason to replace your brake linings prior to wearing down where you're wearing down to the rivets. So here's one of those brake linings, and as you can see, they get a majority of them that you're going to be dealing with get riveted on with just two little brass rivets. When the material wears down and it starts hitting those rivets will dig into the steel rotor and really gouge it up and make a mess of it. And these are pretty cheap. I think you probably get these, each one of the linings, maybe $10 at one of the suppliers. So I'd rather replace these than not being able to find one of these, which are going to be closer to $150, $200, and the availability isn't great. So that's kind of one of those preventative maintenance. Keep your linings thick enough. If you're airing to the side that you think you're pre-flight, and you go, it's getting kind of down there, maybe it's time to change those out versus worrying about braking sometime and gouging out the brake disc. So that's kind of one of those ideas when we're talking about aging aircraft or the availability of hard to find parts, to think a little bit that find the parts that you can get. Brake linings have been not a problem. Brake discs have been a problem. So I want to protect those as much as I can. All right, so put this back on the shelf again. Okay, as you can see on this one, this tire is pretty much worn out. It's not doing too good. It's probably someone pulled it at one point because it's starting to show cords. I'm not necessarily seeing them right here, but that's how you kind of know when you start seeing the cording through there. That's the limitation of the tire. Now, your choice would be, well, it doesn't have much rubber on there, I'm going to replace it. That is perfectly fine. Replace them. But we're just saying that in the flight school, we get the maximum out of it. And as long as they're legally still, we don't see cords showing through there, we'll wait and change it. This one's at that point, so we're going to change it. So the first thing you know, it looks like the wheel that we had taken off there. First thing we're going to do is get yourself a rag, lay out some of the parts here as you're taking them apart. Just going to pull the stem. You can go to O'Reilly's and get, these are great because these help you pull. They have a tail on them, and I'll show you how that works later. This end is going to be for like pulling any valve stems and stuff like this. This will help you pull the actual stem through the wheel half. But for right now, we're just going to release the air out of it. Make sure you have the air out of it. Pull the valve out of it. Here's the valve. I'm going to set that aside. These are under what, 30 psi? In this size, probably not as hazardous, but I mean, wheels, especially split half wheels, which these are bolted together. If you're to take those apart and have pressure in there, it could, you know, they can come apart and actually hurt people. I know my coworker Dave used to work in the airlines. He saw that where they cage them there because they're really high pressure. He saw a guy who got decapitated by a tire blowing up, and it happens even in the monster truck and automotive and tractor things. I mean, always be careful. Release the pressure anytime you're going to be taking these wheel halves apart. I mean, just get rid of the pressure. So right now we got the bead of the tire, as we see right here, has been kind of seated onto these rims. Here's what a rim looks like. That's the seated portion where that will be fitting in there. And what we want to do is, I got a nice little a bead breaker right here that'll help it. I'll show you how that works. If you don't have it, you're going to have to start pushing on the tire and kind of work your way on there. You never want to use a pry bar and mar up these aluminum rims. I've even been out in the field before. A lot of times I'll actually get on here and I'll kind of get my feet on there and stand on them and walk my way around to pop that bead off. Bead breaker works the best. But there again, I mean, that's an investment in how often you change your tires. So here, all this works is it just has that little wedgie guy in there, and we're working our way around, and you see now the tire bead came off of the rim. We want to do that before we unbolt it because we're using, you know, the other half of the wheel on the other side against the framework here to actually have some leverage. You can't have these two flopping around. So I've broke the bead on that side. Now I'm going to come over to this one. Here, as you can see, the brake disc there, you're still getting behind there. And you just work your way around the edge. You're not, see, that just popped right there. You're not ever taking pry bars. If you stick pry bars in there, not good on the rims. I mean, it's going to put scratches. And I've had wheels that I've taken apart that just are really unserviceable because whoever had changed the tires previously was in there wedging with a screwdriver and a pry bar. Don't want to do that. As you notice, I'm pushing with this little blade on the actual rubber next to it without actually touching. I'm just pushing down there. Pry bar, what are you going to push on? You know, that's why a lot of times I'll just, like I said, put it on the floor and just kind of work my feet around, pushing on the bead area here, and it'll eventually let loose. It will. So now that we've gotten both of the beads broken from the split rim, this out of the way, back here, we're going to, and as you see these are going to be 1/2-inch nuts and bolt heads on this side. Now, a lot of times you can just, you don't need to have a socket wrench in there. You can just kind of wedge in an open end there. And we're going to take our hardware off. Always be thinking about how it came together. So it's had a washer and a nut. And always look at that. The nuts are 9 nuts or a locking type. If they feel nice and tight, you can reuse them. If they don't, replace them. You know, it's a standard. In this case, it's a standard aviation locking nut and bolt. Nothing's fancy on these. There we go here. And I always have a shop towel that I just set everything there, kind of in a, so I don't misplace it on the bench and know where it is when I want to put it back together again. And just work your way around. Now, some of the tires are starting to get fancy with O-rings and seals and tubeless tires. A lot of the Cirruses are, but that's a little bit different. It's a little different animal, and that's going to take a little different work. As you see, these are just two wheel halves. They go together. Always look to make sure, depending on it, that there's not any special mark where they line up together. In this case, in this one, there isn't anything on there. Sometimes, like on a nose tire, you might have a stem that comes through a cutout area, and make sure those two line up so you're not damaging the stem on there. So I'm gonna take two wheel halves out, just like that. Now this one here, the tube was fine on this one, the tire. You can inspect it and just see what you think of it. A lot of times we get a lot of wear on the tubes inside the tire. When you pull it out of here, you just have to work your way out. You'll see a lot of even though you have some of the talc in there that keeps it from sticking and getting too sticky in there, but you'll see some rubber that kind of displaces back and forth as you're figuring people are landing it, spooling up really quickly. You're putting on brakes. It's always tweaking on the inner tube to the tire. And that's the other thing on the tire pressures. We see a lot of pinholes and problems on these tubes when tire pressures get low and the tube is allowed to walk a little bit. We call it walking. And I'll show you when we set up this tube on there, how we know if it's walking a little bit. There's a couple ways of doing it. So I can look at this one. It's been in there quite a time frame. The rubber is a little on the stiff side. Always take your hose, look around there, see if you see any problems with it. Now in this case, I'm going to replace it just because, kind of add a little air into the stem and just kind of look at it, make sure you don't. I mean, it's not bad. I mean, you can see there's some distress in here where it was rubbing. But to me, it's not worth taking the risk right now. I'm going to put a new tube in, but this one wasn't leaking. And what you'll see is little marks in there where the rubber, sometimes you'll actually see like little marks where the tube has been kind of wrinkling back and forth because of low tire pressure and the pressure of the tire spinning up and you're using your brakes. And you'll see those marks in there. And, that kind of causes the rubber to get little inclusions, and all of a sudden it'll just like tear. I call them like little pinholes. If I had one to show you, I'd show you, but I don't have any currently. And it just kind of opens up a little fissure, small, tiny little leak. And how you know you got a pinhole going is, I just filled my tire up last week and it's already starting to come down a little bit. It's starting to work one of those areas where the air's slowly leaking out of it. It's getting a little pinhole somewhere. At that, before you're on the runway or the taxiway stuck and tower's mad at you, change that tire out. It's not going to get better. If it's leaking, it's leaking, So get rid of that one there. So as I was talking to you here about the brake disc, we're going to take a look at this one. It's always good to kind of clean out all this area, make sure everything's sitting well on it. I'm just going to pull this one out just for the sake of showing you what I'm going to do. And this is a good time. I have a pin caliper versus a regular caliper. I'm just going to show you because I couldn't find the pin caliper. Pin caliper is, you can get them at the auto parts store. Instead of the caliper being a flat blade like this type of caliper, it's got two little pins for measuring. And that's really nice for getting, if you have a little bit of a rougher surface, for getting a good dimension. Or if you have an edge here, you can go inside the edge. This one doesn't, but I'm just going to take a look and just see where we're at on our thousandths here. This one looks pretty new. And it is in pretty good shape here. It's above the minimum on there. So we can let that go again. If it didn't, at this time you'd change it out. You don't want these getting so thin and so lumpy that you have trouble braking. The pads will just never wear into it. And then, along with the dimensions on this, as you saw on that caliper, that puck doesn't have a whole lot of travel on it. You start getting a really thin disc and really thin brake pads, that puck is way out there, and then you'll see a bunch of fluid because that O-ring is barely seated into the caliper. There's not much room in the used puck and caliper. Oh, here's my pin caliper. Yeah. So, and I don't have one to show you, but it's not, if you see the dimensionally, it's not a real thick, there's not a whole lot of movement. That can only come out so far before it starts leaking. And so you want to take that into consideration while doing your brakes. So, all right, so we're in good dimensions with that. So next thing is, while you're at it, it's a good idea to check your bearings. You got it off, why not check your bearings? Now we can see these look like they are been cleaned pretty recently. So what I might just do on it, just to pull it out and take a look at, you're gonna have a little keeper like this that you just hook your a little teeny screwdriver in there and pull that out of a groove. I'll show you on here. See where it's sitting in right here. There's that little, that's where you pop that out right there. And then what you have is you have your bearings right here. And this right here is a double set of washers. There's a variety of styles, but this just happens to be this double set of washers. And what you have is a little felt piece that has some grease and stuff to collect dirt. And you look at this one, it's really nice and clean. I'm not going to redo anything with it. That looks good. These are that just is kind of like a dust seal. Some of them are like an actual rubbery seal on some tires. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at this. I'm going to clean off the bearing seat here on this one. I'm going to look at it and I'm going to look to make sure that the mated surface, there's not any staining. What we call it water marking, when you see little bearing spots where it sat for a while and moisture got in there and it corroded. But this one looks really good. Everything's been riding fine on that. And then the other time is then you would just go in there and clean off all the grease on this one. This stuff is really clean, so I'm not going to necessarily do that at this point. I'm just going to just look at the outside of it, just wipe it off and then repack it with some new grease, just because there's no reason it's not dirty grease, but it'll give me a chance to look at the actual roller bearings there, and they look fine. So the easiest way to repack, you can do it the old-fashioned way I've done it, is you take some grease in your palm of your hand, and then hold it in your fingers like this, and you start packing it in through the back side of this. Or you can go down to O'Reilly's or one of those places like that, and you can get yourself a bearing packer. This one actually needs to be reloaded again, but and what that does, you look, it comes up and it actually squeezes grease out all those little bearing spots there. And what I like to do then is take my finger with some of that grease. That thing's got kind of messed up. I go nice coating in here, around on that portion of it. Make sure that I'm covered here pretty well. I always scrape the grease off. I always like to kind of run that grease in around that area where that seal is going to be. Don't need to get crazy with the grease, but it's a messy job. It's kind of fun. And now I'm going to put this back in again. You see, I've just kind of filled in along where the thing would be in there. And now I'm going to put my keeper back on. Make sure it gets seated in there, because otherwise, I mean, the bearings will be held in by the cup, but your grease seal is going to pop off, and your bearings are going to get all full, more chance of getting full of dirt and debris at that point. So I'm going to go like this, and you can see, here we go. We got fresh grease there, came all out of that bearing packer there, around all that there. Don't have to have a ton of it all over the place because it'll just fling around in there, but Bearing pack is great because you just put pressure and it just squirts the grease right on through. So that's that. Now the other thing I'm going to do is it's always good while you're here, while you're doing some of this stuff. Now don't get this in your bearing, so always put it in your rag. If you're going to clean something up, you can see anything that you don't like, take a little non-chlorinated brake cleaner on it and just clean up where these, like where the disc is going to go. And then we will be, since I'm touching this with greasy fingers, we will be cleaning off the edge of this. But what you want is you want to make sure there's no dirt and debris on the backside where these are mated. Because I've had customers come back that did a tire change themselves, and you just listen, you can hear if there's a piece of grit, and they go, "Oh, my brakes are thumping," and I go out there and I kind of taxi, and it was like on a Cessna or something, like where you could see it. It's not as easy on a Piper. And I'm looking and I'm watching that the brake discs are just wobble back and forth. So I take it off there, and I found a chunk of dirt and debris underneath the disc. So the disc was sitting up like this a little bit. Everything's together tight, but it just meant that it was wobbling the disc to the wheel, And sure enough, fixed it. Wow, brakes never work so good. And I'm like, yep, that's got to make sure if you're doing that, just keep your workbench clean. And think about those things, because who would ever think that you got a piece of sand or gravel or something, you dropped something and it went in there, and the brake wasn't sitting nicely against the disc wasn't sitting nicely against the actual wheel half. All right, so we got that. This side we already said what was good. I'm not even going to bother redoing that one. I'm just going to set it aside for right now. So now, tire's gone, shot. It goes to the recycle bin. And keep your area space clean here. I'm going to grab the new tire. Make sure they'll have a sticker on there showing this is a Type 3. It's speed rated. Probably, I think the Type 3 is going to be up to 160. Miles per hour or knots. I can't remember how they have it listed. I think it's miles per hour. And the ply rating. We actually use 6 ply ratings, and you can change. The manufacturer has the ply rating. As far as the stiffness of the tire for the airplane, you'll see a lot of the old manuals that like Piper used a 4 ply, and they're a little softer. I don't think the 4 ply has as much longevity for what we use. Most standard you're going to have is a 6 ply rating. And then obviously the size here. So in this case, it's a 6x6. It's going to be a 6-inch rim. And to make sure the profile is the same. And this is just a standard replacement for, it's an Airhawk 6x6. And a lot of times you'll see the speed ratings. This one actually has a speed rating of 120, but I know it's going on a Warrior, so we're not going to really be able to go over that. If you're landing that fast, you're in trouble. So then the next thing is you take a look at it, and they usually give you some type of marking on your tire that you can put your stem against. And you like to do that. The reason I like to do that now, I don't know if they really do check the weight and balance on every single one of these tires and the castings. A lot of times the guys go, well, your stem's there, and that's the lightest spot in the tire, and it automatically balances it. I've never really dug into that. But this spot right there is going to be where I'm going to put the stem, because I know then if I ever have that stem migrating and sliding off that spot, that I've really done that tire got low and it really twisted the whole rim and everything moved in there. And you can see the stem is off in the direction and it's no longer lined up there. So I'm going to just say, you know what, that's a nice mark they give you. They usually give you some mark on one side of where I like to put a stem location. If you don't have anything, just make your own arbitrarily mark on there. And here's the other thing I like to do. If you have wheel pants, here's where you're going to be putting your stem. I take on here, so I can get it working. Well, might not be able to do this, but in this case, I'll draw a line with a ink marker. I think my paint marker has right up. You can't get anything out of it. But I'll do that and I'll make a line right down the side of the tire with that paint marker. And the reason I do that is when we have wheel pants on, you can't see where that stem is. And if you don't, a lot of times they don't, to get them in the little door, if there's a door, it's really hard to find that spot. So you can see that line because you've drawn it all the way out to the sidewall down here. And you can move your airplane back and forth till you get that line where you want it in reference to the floor. And then you can open up the little door and check your air pressure and check your tire pressures. So it's not a bad time to do that if you got your paint marker that works, and make a mark right along where we know we're going to be putting our stem, because that's where our stem is. And that'll give you a reference point. In this case, I don't really need it, and my paint marker doesn't work. So the next thing we're going to do is we got our new tube. And that's the other thing is you want to make sure your bench is clean. Just always have, a rag or something when you're doing. You don't want to be picking up a bunch of junk or, just think about the Princess and the Pea. All of a sudden, if you got something on here, a kernel of something or other, we start abrading your tube, So always keep your workspace clean there. So now you don't want to use a ton of it, but you can get yourself some tire talc. And we're just going to sprinkle a little on there. And what that does is that, you got two kind of butyl rubber surfaces, and a lot of times those things like sticking, and you want them to be able to not stick. So when you get air in there, and they have some movement, so they're not like two. If you take two pieces of butyl rubber, they don't have adhesive, but they kind of like sticking together. So what we do is we use that tire talc inside that tire, and I just kind of work it around there, see how it is. You don't want a whole pile of it sitting down there, but I've coated that. A lot of the new tires have kind of a texture on the inside of them that is really gotten good as far as you can just feel how slippery it is. They've really done good. Airhawk is really good about it. I've never seen a tube get really stuck. It's bad when you start pulling them apart and it's like they glued themselves together. You don't want that. So there again, and then sometimes, the tires are pretty much when you take them out of the bag, they a lot of times have the pre-talc on them a little bit, so you don't need to add a ton more. And so what I'm going to do is I take a look at where I want my stem, and then I usually kind of go to the opposite of it, and I take the other end of the tube, and you just have to start fitting it in. And it's just kind of fitted in the best you can. Fitting it inside there and get it kind of positioned as best. Main thing is you're just getting in there first, just inside the actual tire tabs. Then once you get it kind of going in there like that, you can kind of position it. So I've gotten it in there. All right. So as you see, I'm kind of close to my mark right there, so that's good. So now what I'm going to do is, and I like to do this, I've seen people that maybe have a different way of doing it. I like to pull the stem. This is the reason I like pulling the stem. Stem out. Got my old stem there. I'm not gonna. You can always save those for an emergency because that one was working. You just save them in a bag. You never want to. What I like to do is I like to take an air nozzle, and I like to throw some air in there, and then let it out. So it's resetting everything. Let it in there. It's getting any of the wrinkles out of the tire that you just want it seated properly in there. And it, by expanding it, kind of pushes it into place, and then it relaxes again. And I just want to make sure that I didn't fold the tire tube over, because a fold is gonna, if you could pinch the fold in there permanently, and that's not really going to be good when you keep airing it up, and eventually it's going to fail at that fold. So you want to get those folds out of there. So I do that. I probably air it a couple, 3 times just to make sure the wrinkles are out. Sometimes they're really wrinkly depending on the manufacturer of the tube fitting in the tire. So now we've got that. I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to show you a fancy little tool that you get for $5 at O'Reilly's. Stick it through your hole in your wheel half. And it screws right onto the end here. And it's going to help us pull that stem through the hole. So just giving it a good firm snug. You want to get it in there. So that's all set. Now, go back, just flip that down. Don't have to worry about that. We're going to look at how the tube's sitting in there. It looks really good. You don't want to be pinching it, so you look for any materials there that, you know, make sure it's sitting fine. That looks good. Now, we already said there isn't any special alignment on our halves. They're all built the same. So we can just take our bolts through there like that. And I like hearing that metal sound. If it sounds like rubber, you pinched a tube. So if I got that, I hear metal, then I'm going to pull this up like this, and I'm going to start my washers and my nuts. And what I usually like to do is I usually like just on that first one to snug up that first one, so I keep pressure on there. So just in case I moved it around, the tube could maybe sneak in there. So I'm going to just snug it up. Don't need to go crazy on it. You're just snugging it at this point. We'll torque it after. So I'll just get that one bolt snugged up so it's not loose. It keeps a little bit of tension on the wheel halves. Doesn't take much. There it is. It's snug. These things are not moving together, and I know I've held it together. So when I had metal on metal, if I left it out, there's no chance that that tube came in there. So now, just put our other washers nuts on. All right, and the next thing is we're going to torque these. And most of the time you'll see on your wheel halves, there'll be a sticker on there. And so this one here says that that with these, and you can kind of know most of the Cleveland wheels, and you can look them up too. They'll tell you the bolt length or the bolt size and stuff. If it's generally speaking in aviation, if your ratchet or your wrench is a 1/2 inch, that it's a 5/16 inch bolt, and they go 150 on the torque. The smaller ones that take a 7/16 wrench, a lot of times like in the nose tire, those are going to be about 90. But there should be a sticker on there, and if you don't, you'll find some marking on there, and then you can look it up in a chart. Just Google it, and it'll tell you the bolt torque. So so then we just get our torque wrench out and do that, torque them up, and then come back after we did that, and we would put our stem back in and just air up our tire to our POH. So that's pretty much that. And once you you'll see what happens. I'll just air this up real quick just to show you. You can do it without the stem again, just to seat it to make sure if you're really concerned about it, it'll come up. It's going to pop your stem into place. It'll actually seat your tire just like that. And let the air out again. And there it is. It's just one more. You can kind of tell and hear inside there of it moving around that you got yourself not a fold in there. So then it's just a matter of putting your stem back in and airing your tire to the okay, we're gonna hurry up here because we still want to talk about our other stuff. My tire changing might be taking me a little long. We'll just throw this other tire back on again real quick, and then we'll get into the only manufactured parts and things. So. Over there, people. So we're back to where we're at there. I'm gonna put our tire back on. Go like that. And then we can just clean off those threads a little bit. And the threads on this. And we don't do anything with our brakes yet. We're just gonna leave this. And now we're gonna screw our axle nut on. And what I like to do is, I like to get it on there, see how it feels. Just keep on hand tightening it a little bit until we get it, everything seated in those bearings. You're kind of preloading the bearings. Oh, I'm gonna move that out of the way so you don't hear that. And can just kind of roll the wheels around. You're gonna hear the bearings kind of transferring up there. That's a normal sound. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our channel locks again. There again, there's not really gonna be a specific torque. There's some, if you have a airplane that has a torque, a lot of times what you do is you torque them and then you back off a torque on them. Well, in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to check how that goes. And the main thing is where you're going to be lining up your hole, and make sure that if you want to come back, just kind of go a little bit tighter. And then I go, that's not too bad, but she's dragging a little bit. You don't want the bearings chattering and loose. So you kind of get yourself lined up. So you got a little bit of load on that tire. And so I usually take a look at it. If you spin it, it'll kind of stop itself in probably a turn and a half, 2 turns. You know, it has a little bit of drag. You know, at that point that those bearings are not going to loosen up. The worst thing you can do for bearings is when you go change a tire and it spins forever and you notice and you feel your wheel and the bearings and everything were just slopping around inside the races, and the cones and the seated portions are just kind of flopping around. You'll see ridges, and it just wears out your bearings sooner. You don't want them too tight because that's just going to cause friction. When you land, it's going to be too hard to spool up, and that's going to cause that tube to walk again. And here's that spot I was talking about. Say we had this marked. This tire's been rotated, so it doesn't have the marking on there. But if you had your line here for your stem and stuff, you look at the stem and you want to see that stem straight up. If you see it moving way over, or if it's way off of the hole, you know that hole, the tube and tire has walked inside the rim. And you know, you've probably done some, you're probably not short of just your tire going flat on you. So anyways, back to here, we're going to put our cotter pin. And what I'm going to do is, the trick is going to be, you know, this is not, get that a hole and it's recessed in there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take it, don't bend it aggressively, but just get a bend going on it on that one end, because you can straighten it out. It's not going to hurt it. And sometimes you might have to do it a little bit here and give yourself a little bit of a help to line up and get that to go. And then once you get in there like that, you can get that to go in the other hole. Sometimes if they don't quite line up, we're going to take your tool there and it kind of centers that hole a little bit. And then we're going to go like that. Straighten that cotter pin back out again. Push it down like this. And then I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to keep the long pin. And for repeat things. There's usually a longer tang. Usually you want the longer tang to mount on this side. So then what we're going to do is we're going to take this longer tang in this case. And you're going to bend it up into place. Up and over. Don't have my favorite pliers right now today, but you're going to bend that up and over. In this case, I just want to keep it out of the way, so I'm going to bend it up and over. And this. And a lot of times they cut off the other tang. I don't do that. I think that so you have 2 tangs there. I just kind of bring that one up. You're not going to be able to wrap it around. It's a shorty. So what I do is I keep a little bit of it on still. So at least I have two legs going, and I just bend it up and make sure that it's not going to hit the stem. And there you go. We're all good there. Everything's torqued there. And then it's just the reverse of putting these on. And what I like to do is just push the puck back a little bit get them going here. I need to put the brake linings back on. And this other thing too is check the stems on here that go into your wheel. The actual hub of your axle, and just make sure they're not all corroded and that they're going to slide, because this sliding back and forth, and these are in good shape right now. And there again, when you get these lined up like this, get the threads started, there's going to be a torque on these, and generally speaking, it's right around it's right around 100 inch-pounds for the most part. Depends on your bolts and everything. So you're going to go back and torque that. If you don't have access to it, your torque wrench at that time, you're out in the field somewhere. I mean, you can kind of know if you hang on to a 1/4 inch right here, you're not going to snap them off. You're going to be pretty darn close into that inch-pounds. But best thing is, if you have that, I'll come back and torque this later. But I'm going to get these on just snug at this point. But generally, it's only a 1/4 inch bolt, so you're in that range of about 100 inch-pounds. And so I can just snug these down like this. Check that this is still loose. It's going to be loose for the first time because you pushed the puck back. And then what I like to do is come back here, and I like to clean off any fingerprints and oil and gunk that I might have had on the brake disc. Let's clean that up. All right, and there we go. We've done that change. Hopefully that was beneficial to you. Now, I'd like to talk about, as far as maintaining it, is you need to kind of keep track of let me grab a rag real quick here, Pete. Track of maintenance on our airplanes. You know, a lot of these airplanes that we're flying are, 40, 50 years old. And sometimes parts availability are not good. We have good boneyards like Letworth and different things where you can find some old spares and stuff. But all of a sudden you go to your mechanic or you're looking yourself and you go, hey, I go up and you call online, you call up to a place and they're like, oh, that's out of stock. We don't have any in stock. Looks like it's backordered for 6 months. And you're like, oh boy, how am I playing down for that length of time? So I find it all the time with our fleet of airplanes that we're working on it. So the thing is, it's kind of planning ahead and just kind of taking a look, but you can't plan ahead for everything. The one thing I said, we had a problem with getting filters. Filters are now not a bad issue. They've been kind of straightening out, but the brake discs, those are still troublesome. But here's an option that you can think about. Challenger Aviation Products makes a reusable filter. And it's kind of slick. It kind of pretty much comes from the racing industry. This is a replacement for the 110, which is the 48 110. And it's really neat because this is what you get in there. A metallic filter that's washable and cleanable. And these are supposed to be able to last up to 1,200 hours and quite a few washes and up to 5 years before they tell you to replace them. The initial cost is a little bit more, obviously for this item, but once you've done that, you can wash it as much as you want. You could, you don't have to cut it open and destroy it. So the whole idea is, and then you can also get a new element. The element replacement, I believe, is in the $150, $160 range. Well, that's, when you're paying $50 a filter, or if you can't find a filter, this is a great alternative. Now some people are saying, well, they don't say the microns of filtration are as good as the paper. Racing industry, motorcycles, cars have been using these forever. They seem to think that they work good. I don't think I would get hung up on that. I don't think it's with our airplanes that is concerned. Otherwise, it wouldn't have gotten approval. Made in the USA. It's always nice. It's good. So anyways, that's an option there for availability of you know, a reusable oil filter. That's kind of a neat thing, you know. So that's one option. Another option that you know we have for aircraft parts we do have a place like Wentworth and stuff that, you know, they got previously used parts, and you can go and hopefully find something. I just went and found a couple of door handles that worked on my Cessna. They're not great. They're not perfect, but you can find things there that'll work. And if you can't find it from the manufacturer, then the next thing which the Federal Administration of Aviation has come up with, and they did it back quite a few years ago. They mainly did it for the airlines. And that is, if you look under 14 CFR 21, the FAR 21.9, replacement and modification articles, and it talks about manufacturing of aircraft parts. And it talks about what we all standard PSO parts, PMA parts, and stuff like that. However, they have a little thing in there that is line 5 on there, produced by an owner and operator for maintaining and altering that owner or operated product, that being your airplane that you own. Okay. And a lot of times that's kind of been misoverlooked. The FAA did an advisor circulator that talks about this. It's called 20-62, and the Echo is the most recent one. That was the change order on it was 2018. And you can see there's where the change is on Echo, and it just talks about identification. But there's a lot of stuff in there that you don't need. But basically, it's talking about giving you kind of advice on who it is. They'll use, for an example, let's see where they talk about you can deem it as an acceptable part, but it gives you the guidance for coming up with the parts and what you need to do. And for the owner and manufactured parts, they want them to be a quality that's, you know, you need to figure out the drawings and the quality of that part as far as maybe getting the actual original drawings. And you have to be, as the owner, involved in the process. You don't have to make the part. You can have somebody making the part. And there's also, you can read up a guidance. If you type in the guidance on that, somebody in 1993, I believe it was April of 93, there's all these guidances, the lawyer guidances talking about what it really means to produce the part. It means you don't directly produce it if you don't have a machine lathe or whatever it is, whatever it takes them, but you're in the process of doing it. Okay, so that's the main important thing. Now, here's something you have to think about in there. Okay, so this is what they say. Parts were produced by owner operator, installation on their own aircraft. That's number one, own aircraft. You can't be doing it for Billy Bob, your friend down the street. It's got to be your own aircraft. In parentheses, they say, i.e. by a certified air carrier, because that's originally where they came up with the owner manufactured parts. You have a big fleet of airplanes and your Delta, and they go, wow, these parts are really expensive, or we can't get the manufacturer to get them. And we've gone through, we know we break a whole bunch of these, so they just make a whole bunch of their own parts that are going to supply them. So then an owner operator is considered the producer of the part if the owner participated in controlling the design, manufacture, or quality of the part. Participating in the design of the part can include supervising the manufacture of the part or providing the manufacturer with the following: design data, the materials in which to make the part, the fabrication process, assembly methods, or the quality control procedures. A lot of times it might be, I got this old worn out part that's bad, and they can look at that and reverse engineer it off of the old certified part. But, oh, okay, well, that's made out of this. I can tell this. Okay, here's the dimensions. Oh boy, these dimensions are worn. And then you start working on the design process of maybe what that part was like. That is not saying you have to be, if you're turning out a part or you're stamping out a metal piece or something, cutting the metal piece, that you have to actually do it. When you're participating in it, you have a little skin in the game on that part. So now, you know, it could save you some money. My opinion on that is you have to be really careful thinking about this. I always take a look at maintaining. I got 2 airplanes and I maintain them. I would rather somebody does the R&D on it and see if there's somebody out there that's already done something for it. If I can't find the part, or if I look at that, my goodness, it's a little knob over there and it's $800. That's really stupid. Let's see if somebody else makes an aftermarket part that's in there. It's a lot easier when somebody's already invented the wheel, but there's times you might have to go invent the wheel yourself. I can tell you, for instance, this is a very simple one, but it's one that we've done here at Thunderbird, and that is on cowling doors for the oil doors. Piper cowling doors, the assemblies are not really super expensive, but they're quite a bit for what you get. The problem is they haven't been manufacturing them real well. They have some issues. And so the last few that we got, 2 weeks later, they just fly apart. And it's $300. And you're like, oh, that's not great. So I started looking at it, and in there, it's just a piece of metal, and it's a 32 thousandths. You know what it is. It's not anything big. You could cut that out from a template from an old one. Has a hole drilled in it, and a couple little areas where you rivet on another part. It's got a standard piano hinge, but you can get a lot of aircraft piano hinges that are better quality. Their problem was the hinge and the pin they were doing just isn't secured properly. I mean, it's a bad hinge, and they start falling apart. And you pay $300, you get a little irritated with it lasting like two weeks. The other thing is they actually specify some of the parts in there that, like the latch mechanism, is just made by like a Camlock company or something like that. Now, the interesting thing about there is they use one that only receives 32 thousandths. So when you got a doubler around there, that doubler is just made out of a piece of thin aluminum, and that door catches it at 32 thousandths. Well, I looked in there and I go, 62. They offer them in the 64 thousandths. I'm like, because we like to put a little striker plate next to it, riveted onto that doubler, because it's a stainless, because it's much more, it doesn't gouge out every time we close and open the doors around here a lot. But the 32 thousandths ones don't really hold it real well. And then you can go and get really, really good quality aviation piano hinge at length, and then cut it to length and put the pin in there and lock the pin in there. And we can make a door. Maybe it's not much cheaper than, with labor and everything, than $300, but they last a long time. And we can have them sitting on the shelf versus these ones you can't get a hold of. They're in stock. And when you do find one, you pay $300 for it, and it falls apart right away. And so that might be a case where an owner manufactured part. We would go through a lot of them. A lot of our fleet have those same doors on it. So that might be a case where you would, now I'm not installing it on a customer plane, I'm installing it on our airplane, and that's where you might want to see an owner manufactured part. Or when there's just not an availability of a part, just can't get it, no longer made. Now what are you going to do? Is your plane garbage? You're going to have to come up with something. And so it's going to take a lot more energy. I've seen people just go down to the hardware store and find a part that, isn't really aviation related, and they throw it on there. You don't want to be littering your airplane with a bunch of owner manufactured parts that are just junk. So that's just something to think about. But it is in there if you do it the right way. That is an option to maintain these aged fleet. And I think the best way of doing it is look at what somebody's done. I like a lot of the clubs. Cessna has a club, Beach has a club, Piper has the clubs. You've got to read through the stuff in the clubs. Some of it is very, like in any club, you see the things and you're like, oh my goodness, you read some of these guys and you're like, oh, you shouldn't even be owning an airplane. But sift through it. Sometimes you get some good information. Say, hey, you know what? I found that, I had that same problem. See what somebody else is researching. They might have some good ideas on it too. So anyways, that's just kind of on that aging fleet. And the thing is, plan ahead, think about it. And if you need to, there is the availability, and look up some of these circulars and look up 21 21.9 doesn't say a whole lot, but the circular kind of explains a little bit more. And it looks like now that change part in the circular, they put in that ruling in there, kind of explained it a little bit more. So is there any questions?